I am Emily Carter, 32 years old and the founder of EC Studio, a fashion brand built from scraps, sleepless nights, and sheer defiance. To the world, I'm a success story, but to my family, I was always the disappointment they cast aside. 10 years ago, they told me to leave and never looked back. What they don't know is that I now own the very house they once threw me out of. Before I dive into this story, let me know where you are watching from and hit that like and subscribe button if you have ever felt left out by your own family. I was born into a house where love was measured in achievements, not affection. In Boston, the Carter name meant excellence. My father, Dr. Richard Carter, a surgeon with steady hands that saved lives, my mother, Professor Laura Carter, a legal mind admired by colleagues and feared by students. To neighbors, we were the picture of an accomplished family, a home filled with discipline, brilliance, and a promise of future greatness. But to me, that house was a gallery of expectations where every frame had a golden shine except mine. At the dinner table, conversation was never about movies, friends, or silly crushes. It was about Harvard-Yale residency programs, clerkships, and partnerships at firms. Michael, my older brother, sat tall, flipping through law journals before he even turned 20, already courted by prestigious firms. Anna, the youngest, treated high school biology as if it were medical residency, dissecting frogs with surgical precision and dreaming of stethoscopes. They fit perfectly into the Carter blueprint. And then there was me threading needles in secret sketching dresses during math class, cutting old bed sheets into skirts I pretended were couture. My mother's tone was sharp as glass when she caught me one afternoon sketching instead of finishing calculus. Emily, sewing is a hobby, not a career. You need to be serious about your future. To her, fabric was scraps. To me, it was language. Every stitch told a story, every hem whispered a possibility. But in that house, my language had no translation. My father rarely raised his voice, which made his disappointment worse. His silence was heavier than thunder. The night I first mentioned Parsons School of Design, his eyes clouded, his lips pressed thin. You've been given every opportunity, and you want to throw it away to play with fabric. That word play burned deeper than any shout. It turned my dreams into childish toys in their eyes. Comparison was the rhythm of my childhood. Why can't you be more like Michael? Anna knows what she wants. Why don't you? Every sentence chipped me smaller, as though my worth was shrinking into the seams of their perfect tapestry. And yet there was one person who didn't see me as a stain. Grandma Grace. She wasn't a designer by profession, but her hands were magic. She'd lived through rationing during the war, sewing her own dresses when fabric was scarce. Her sewing machine was her companion, its steady hum filling her small kitchen with warmth. I was 7 when she placed a spool of thread in my hand. Clothes can change how a person feels about themselves, she said, showing me how to finish a hem. And you, my dear, can change the world with yours. When she said it, her words didn't sound like indulgence. They sounded like truth. In her kitchen, I wasn't a disappointment. I was an artist in the making. I clung to her belief like it was oxygen. I kept scraps of fabric the way some children kept candy, folding them neatly, imagining what they could become. At 10, I stitched my first real dress out of leftover curtains. It was uneven, too long in some places, too short in others, but when I wore it, I felt transformed. For a fleeting moment, I wasn't the invisible Carter child. I was Emily, the girl who could create something out of nothing. Still, in my parents' house, hope was fragile. Every time I showed them a sketch, my father's silence wrapped tighter around me. Every time I tried to speak of design, my mother corrected me like I'd misquoted a legal statute. Michael laughed when he saw me sewing late at night. Anna rolled her eyes as if it was a childish phase. The walls of that house pressed closer each year, filled with trophies, degrees, awards that weren't mine. My victories, a handmade blouse, a design praised by a teacher, were invisible against the shine of Harvard acceptances and pre-med accolades. Holidays became rituals of exclusion. At Christmas, Michael unwrapped leather briefcases, Anna received medical kits, while I was given books on serious subjects, or worse, nothing at all. Birthdays blurred into silence. One year, I remember waiting all day for someone to mention it. No one did. The cake on the table wasn't mine. At night, when the weight became unbearable, I whispered to myself, maybe I was born broken. Maybe that's why they never loved me. The thought lingered like smoke in my lungs, but I stitched through the doubt. Thread and fabric became my rebellion, my quiet scream in a house that demanded silence. Each needle prick was a reminder I was still here. I was still creating. Grandma's voice was the only echo of belief. The things worth doing will always scare you first. It became a mantra, yet for all her encouragement, I still lived under my parents' roof, still ate at their table, still felt the sting of being the odd sketch in their perfect gallery. And though I told myself I could endure forever, every wound has a limit. But one moment changed everything. The night it all broke was not a storm with lightning, it was a storm made of silence. Boston winters have a way of sinking into your bones. That Sunday evening, the air outside was soaked with rain, the kind that taps against windows in steady, unrelenting rhythms. Inside the Carter dining room was warm lit by the soft glow of chandeliers, the table lined with roast chicken steamed vegetables, and a bottle of Bordeaux my father favored. It looked like perfection. It felt like suffocation. Michael scrolled on his phone, smirking at something on the screen. Anna leafed through medical school brochures as if the pages were already her destiny. My mother sliced the chicken with her usual precision, every movement sharp, decisive. My father sat at the head of the table, his tablet in hand, nodding occasionally as if in quiet judgment of the world. And me, I sat with words burning inside me, rehearsed all day, threatening to choke me if I didn't let them out. My palms were damp against my napkin. My fork trembled slightly each time it touched the plate. Finally, when I felt the weight pressing so hard on my chest I could barely breathe, I spoke. I'm not applying to law school. The room froze. The clink of silverware stopped midair. Even the rain outside seemed to hush as though waiting for the verdict. My father lowered his tablet slowly, carefully, like a judge about to hand down a sentence. His eyes locked on me, steady and unreadable. What did you just say? I swallowed hard, my throat dry. I'm applying to Parsons School of Design. In New York. I want to study fashion. The words left my mouth like fragile glass, and I braced for the shatter. My mother's knife hovered above the chicken, her hand stiff. Michael finally looked up, his face twisted in something between amusement and disbelief. Anna just stared, lips pressed tightly, eyes wide but unreadable. Fashion design? My father repeated, his voice low, deliberate, as though tasting foreign syllables he found distasteful. Emily, you can sew as a hobby. You cannot make a life out of it. I can, I said, my voice shaking but firm enough to rise above the hum of blood in my ears. And I will. The air snapped taut like a string pulled too far. My mother was the first to let the string break. You are throwing away every opportunity we've given you, she said sharply, her words like knives. Do you have any idea how ungrateful you sound? I'm not ungrateful, I whispered, though my throat ached. I'm just tired of pretending I want a life that isn't mine. The silence that followed was not silence at all. It was judgment. It was rejection. It was the final brick in the wall they had built between us. My father's voice came last, deep and slow, each word hammered into me like a nail. If you walk down this path, don't expect us to fund it. No tuition, no rent, no support. You'll be on your own. The rain lashed harder against the windows like applause for their verdict. For a heartbeat, fear clawed at me. The thought of living without their safety net made my stomach twist, my vision blur. But beneath the fear, something steadier stirred. Grandma Grace's voice. The things worth doing will always scare you first. I understand, I said softly. My hands shook beneath the table, but I didn't let them see. Dinner continued in a suffocating silence. The clink of cutlery muted the taste of food, turning to ash in my mouth. No one looked at me again. In that moment, I was already erased. That night in my room, I folded clothes into a small suitcase. Sketchbooks stacked carefully, as if the pages themselves were fragile children I needed to protect. And then, the most important item, the battered Singer sewing machine Grandma had given me. Its paint chipped its sound old and worn, but to me it was heartbeat compass weapon and prayer. I wanted to cry, but no tears came. There was no space left for them. Only resolve. Before dawn, I called Grandma. She didn't sound surprised. "I'll send you a little something to get started," she said gently. "It isn't much, but I believe in you." When I hung up, my chest ached, not from fear this time, but from love. The kind of love that doesn't demand proof. The next morning, the Carter house glowed in the rain-white clapboard siding, slick and shining like it had been freshly painted for my departure. I stood at the door with my suitcase, my sewing machine at my feet, and my future pressing against me like the cold air outside. I didn't look back as I stepped out, not because I didn't care, but because I knew if I saw those windows, if I caught even a glimpse of the familiar light, I might falter, and faltering was not an option. On the train to New York, the world blurred past in streaks of gray and silver. My pocket held $500, my lap held the sewing machine, and my heart held a fragile, flickering hope. I didn't know if I'd make it. I only knew I couldn't keep living someone else's life. The day came when I couldn't keep waiting. New York did not welcome me with open arms. It tested me, bruised me, and left me standing on sidewalks wondering if I had made the worst mistake of my life. The city doesn't care who you are, it only cares if you can survive it. I found a shoebox room in Queens walls, thin enough that I could hear my neighbor arguing over rent through the plaster. The rent was $450. Grandma's $500 vanished in a day. That left me with $50, a sewing machine, and a dream so fragile it felt like a glass ornament carried into a storm. By day, I was a student at Parsons. By night, I was anything the city needed: a waitress serving coffee at a diner where the neon lights flickered, a stock clerk stacking discount shampoo bottles until my hands cracked, a retail worker folding endless piles of denim under the gaze of a manager who barely remembered my name. Sleep became a luxury. I stitched until 3:00 a.m., the hum of the machine louder than the pounding in my head. Sometimes I woke up with a pin still tucked behind my ear threads, tangled in my hair like a crown of exhaustion. Fabric was expensive, too expensive, so I scavenged. I begged for scraps from textile shops, snatched up damaged rolls from warehouses, and tore down old curtains from thrift stores. My classmates presented crisp new bolts of fabric in class. I spread patched-together sheets across the table and prayed my professors would see intent where others saw lack. And then somehow one did. Ms. Lopez, my design professor, paused at my desk one afternoon. I was bent over a dress stitched from a second-hand bedsheet, my fingers raw from sewing. She leaned in and whispered, "You have vision, Emily. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." I carried those words like armor. On nights when I wanted to collapse, when my ramen noodles boiled over because I was too tired to watch the pot, I repeated them to myself. You have vision. Slowly, tiny sparks appeared in the darkness. I began selling scarves and skirts to classmates. I wrapped each piece in brown paper, tied it with ribbon salvaged from discarded packaging, and wrote notes in my neatest handwriting. "Thank you for believing in something made by hand." The money was small, barely enough to stretch my budget. But each sale was proof someone wanted what I created. Each note I wrote back to them felt like a promise that I wasn't crazy to keep going. Still, the rejections came in waves. Boutiques told me my work was too personal or not commercial enough. A Fashion Week intern laughed when I mentioned my studio was a bedroom in Queens. I learned to swallow humiliation like bitter tea. But the city has a strange way of turning when you least expect it. It happened on a Tuesday. My class had been given a project to design an outfit inspired by transformation. I stayed up for nights stitching emerald green curtains into a dress with an asymmetrical neckline. By the time I finished, my fingers bled and I almost skipped class from sheer exhaustion. But I went. After class, a friend, Mia, asked to borrow the dress for a rooftop event. "It's just a networking thing." She shrugged. Some influencers might be there. That night, my phone buzzed nonstop. Mia had posted a photo twirling under string lights, the Manhattan skyline glowing behind her. The emerald dress caught every light as if it were alive. A fashion influencer with 500,000 followers reposted it with the caption, "Obsessed with this upcycled beauty by Emily Carter Design." I stared at my phone in disbelief. Comments poured in. Strangers asked if the dress was for sale. Could I make one in red and black? Could I take custom orders? By morning, I had 8 orders and barely enough fabric to attempt them. I skipped class that day, sprinted from one fabric shop to another, bargaining like my life depended on it. By nightfall, my apartment had transformed into a workshop. The twin bed became storage. The kitchen table became a cutting board. My floor disappeared under fabric scraps. Each package I mailed out was wrapped by hand, each note signed with gratitude. And then momentum. More influencers tagged me. A coat I'd made from vintage wool appeared outside Paris Fashion Week, worn by a stranger who twirled for photographers. That coat had been rejected by 3 boutiques. Now it was turning heads in Paris. For the first time, money trickled in faster than it trickled out. I upgraded to a slightly larger apartment still in Queens, but with a room I proudly called my studio. I bought my first industrial sewing machine. And then one evening a letter arrived. The handwriting stopped me cold, Grandma Grace. I saw your name in a magazine today, she wrote. I knew this day would come. You've always had the hands and the heart. Keep sewing my girl. Keep proving them wrong, though I know you're not doing it for them. I sat at my work table, the machine still humming from unfinished orders, and let the tears fall. Not tears of failure. Tears of someone who could finally see the tide beginning to turn. By the time I turned 32, EC Studio had become more than a brand, it was a story. A flagship store in Soho, another in Los Angeles, a third opening in London. Celebrities wore my designs on red carpets. My face appeared on talk shows I'd once watched from a flickering TV in that shoebox room. The girl they thought would fail had become the woman they could no longer ignore. And just as my empire stood steady, the past came knocking. My assistant poked her head into my office one December afternoon, a stack of fabric swatches in my hands. There's a Laura Carter online too, she said carefully. She says, she's your mother. 10 years of silence, 10 birthdays forgotten, 10 Christmases erased, and now this. They finally realized something was slipping from their hands. The phone call should have felt like a miracle. It felt like a trap. Emily, my mother, said, her voice smooth, as if she'd spoken my name every day for the last 10 years instead of not at all. It's been far too long. We'd love for you to come home for Christmas. The whole family will be there. Michael Anna, your father. Her tone was warm, almost casual, as though she was inviting me to brunch after a busy week, not attempting to bridge a decade of silence. Why now? The words slipped out before I could stop them. A pause, then a laugh too light to be real. Because it's Christmas, darling. It's time to be together again. I said yes, but the line in my mind had already drawn itself. I wouldn't return as the girl they discarded. I would return as the woman who had stitched herself a throne out of scraps, and I would not arrive empty-handed. The house looked exactly the same as if no time had passed at all. White clapboard siding, green shutters, a wreath so perfectly arranged it might have been copied from a magazine. But to me, the house wasn't decoration. It was memory. The night of ultimatums. The silence after my confession. The place where I was erased. Snow crunched under my boots as I walked to the door. My mother opened it, her smile wide but brittle, wrapped in a cashmere sweater that reeked of effort. She leaned in for a hug I didn't immediately return. Her perfume smelled like winter roses and denial. Inside the house was warm, glowing. Cinnamon roasted turkey and pine needles scented the air. The living room glittered with Christmas lights strung too neatly. My father stood by the fireplace, glass of brandy in hand, his posture the same unyielding line I remembered. Michael was beside him, sleek suit, confident smirk. Anna perched on the sofa, medical journal in her lap. They all turned when they saw me. Their smiles were polite but strained, like greeting an old colleague rather than welcoming home a daughter, a sister. How was your flight? New York must be so cold this time of year. You must be very busy with your business. The questions were surface level, the kind you could find on a script for strangers. No one asked about the decade of silence. No one said, "We missed you." I smiled back, but inside my jaw clenched. Each word of small talk was another brick in the wall they had built. Dinner was a theater of pretense. Michael dominated the conversation with stories of his law firm cases that made him look brilliant. My father nodded proudly, interjecting details only a surgeon could offer to remind us of his own prestige. Anna spoke of her medical research, her tone earnest, her words dotted with medical jargon that left no space for questions. I listened, I nodded, but my thoughts drifted. To the nights I spent eating instant noodles in Queens while they feasted here. To the way they smiled in holiday photos posted online without a single acknowledgement of the daughter they'd erased. At one point, Michael leaned back and smirked at me. "So, Emily fashion? I guess Instagram really does change lives." A ripple of laughter followed small, polite, dismissive. I didn't answer, not because I didn't have words, but because silence was sharper. Let them sit in it. My mother tried to smooth over the moment. "We're just so proud of all of you," she said, glancing at Michael, then Anna, her eyes landing on me, lasted the pause, speaking louder than her words. "It's wonderful to have the whole family together again." The whole family. I almost laughed. For 10 years I wasn't part of that definition. Now, conveniently, I was. Their attempts at normalcy grew more desperate as the evening went on. My mother piled food on my plate as if turkey and mashed potatoes could erase abandonment. My father asked pointedly about my business not to celebrate but to measure, to calculate. Michael cracked jokes about runway drama, and Anna avoided my eyes altogether. They weren't inviting me back. They were reclaiming their narrative. If Emily was back, then the Carters could once again appear whole, but I wasn't there to play a role in their show. I sat quietly letting them talk, letting their words stack up like paper walls, thin, fragile, ready to burn. My silence wasn't surrender. It was preparation. When dessert was cleared and coffee poured, I knew it was time. My bag rested against my chair, heavier than any suitcase I had once carried out of this house. Inside, it was not fabric, not sketches, but something sharper than scissors, steadier than thread. The pretense was almost over, and so the stage was set for the final strike. Coffee cups clinked softly, the air thick with cinnamon and polite exhaustion. For a moment it seemed the night might end with nothing more than false laughter and strained smiles. But I hadn't come to Boston for small talk. I placed my hands on the table, steady, deliberate. "I brought you all a gift." 4 pairs of eyes turned toward me. Curiosity flickered in my mother's expression. Michael smirked, expecting theater tickets, maybe some ironic fashion trinket. My father leaned back, suspicion hardening his features. From my bag, I drew out 3 sleek black envelopes and slid them across the table. The sound of paper against wood was sharper than any knife. "Go ahead," I said quietly. They opened them in unison. My mother's breath caught. Michael's smirk faltered. Anna blinked rapidly, her hands trembling slightly as she held the document closer to the light. My father's face went pale. Inside, each envelope was the same thing, a notarized deed signed and sealed. The Carter family home transferred into my name. My father's voice cracked the silence. "What is this supposed to mean?" "It means," I said, my voice calm as glass, "the house you told me to leave will never throw me out again. Because it belongs to me now." Michael let out a low whistle, leaning back in his chair. "You bought the house." "Seriously?" My mother's hand shook so violently the coffee in her cup spilled onto the saucer. "Emily, why would you?" "Because I can." My tone was steady, almost gentle. "Because the girl you thought would fail built a life without you. And because I wanted you to understand there is no bitterness left. Only clarity." Anna looked at me, her lips parting, as if she wanted to say something, but the words stayed trapped in her throat. For the first time that evening, her eyes softened, something unspoken flickering there. My father set his cup down slowly, deliberately, as if grounding himself. His jaw was tight, his voice low. "You think this proves something?" "No," I answered. "It doesn't prove anything to you. It proves something to me that I don't need your approval to stand in this room, to exist as a Carter, to live." The silence that followed was deafening. Then, unexpectedly, my mother spoke, her voice cracking for the first time. "We were wrong," she whispered. "We thought we were protecting you from failure. We didn't see what you were capable of." Her words should have warmed me. Once they would have been everything I craved. But all I could think of were the nights in Queens when I sat in the dark sewing by the glow of a desk lamp, hungry and alone, waiting for a call that never came. I smiled faintly. "I hope you enjoy the house. Merry Christmas." The words landed like a gavel. I rose from my chair. My movements were unhurried, each step a declaration. I leaned down to hug Anna quickly. She held on a moment longer than I expected. I nodded to Michael, who gave me a crooked smile that was neither mockery nor kindness, just acknowledgement. As I reached the doorway, my mother called my name softly. "Emily." I didn't turn back. The front door opened to a world of falling snow. Flakes clung to my hair, melting into the warmth of my skin. The night air was sharp, clean, alive, with something that tasted like freedom. Behind me, the Carter house stood still, its lights glowing against the winter dark. But inside, something had shifted. They had seen me, not the failure, not the disappointment, but the woman they could no longer erase. And as I walked down the long driveway, boots crunching against fresh snow, I knew this night was more than confrontation. It was reclamation. They thought they could break me. All along, they were only building my fire. Every threat they made only sharpened my resolve. The snow fell heavier as I reached the car, each flake catching the glow of the street lamps, turning the night into a quiet performance just for me. I opened the door, slid behind the wheel, and sat in silence, my breath fogging the glass. Inside that house I had faced them, not with shouting, not with revenge, but with proof of the life I had built without them. I had given them the one gift they never expected. The house they once used to exile me now returned as a gesture of power wrapped in mercy. Driving back to my hotel, the city lights blurred through the windshield. Snow tears, I wasn't sure which streaked harder across the glass. For years, I had dreamed of moments like this where they would finally admit they were wrong, where they would apologize, beg me to return. And now that my mother had whispered regret, the words landed hollow. They weren't healing. They weren't enough. The truth was, I didn't need them anymore. I thought of the girl who left Boston with $500 in her pocket and a battered sewing machine at her feet. She had been terrified, fragile, starved for approval. That girl would have given anything to hear what my mother said tonight. But the woman I had become, the founder of EC's studio, the one who stitched her own destiny from scraps, no longer needed it. Approval is a leash. Tonight, I cut it. My reflection in the window looked back at me, framed by snowflakes, stronger than I ever thought I could be. I saw not the disappointment of my family, but the proof of survival, of creation, of resilience. Every rejection, every night I went hungry, every stitch sewn by candlelight had brought me here. Owning the house wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about flaunting success. It was closure. It was standing in the place where they told me I didn't belong, and realizing I never needed their doorway to find my path. Somewhere in the quiet, I thought of Grandma Grace. Her voice soft but steady. The things worth doing will always scare you first. She was right. The fear had been immense, but it had shaped me, carved me into someone my parents couldn't erase. I wished she could have seen me walk out of that house tonight, not as the forgotten child, but as the woman who reclaimed her own story. I parked outside the hotel and sat in the car, letting the engine hum beneath me, letting the snow blanket the windshield until the world looked new. In that moment, I realized Christmas would never mean the same thing again, not because of them, but because of me. Christmas was no longer a reminder of absence of chairs left empty of calls that never came. It was proof that I could gift myself something greater than anything wrapped in paper or tied with ribbon. I could gift myself freedom. And maybe that was the only gift that truly mattered. As I stepped out of the car, snowflakes swirling around me like confetti, I whispered a truth into the night air. Not for them, not for anyone else, but for me. They lost me. That was their punishment.